Namaste. When it comes to understanding the path, or the most essential path to the Absolute, ultimately the Vedic system was meant to engage everyone in a process that will elevate them from whatever mode of living, or whatever their position is, to a higher stage or status of life. Thus, there are many levels of understanding found within the Vedic tradition in order to accommodate the various forms of consciousness and tendencies of the innumerable living beings, especially humans. But without coming to the highest level of knowledge and realization, they will continue to engage in activities resulting in varying degrees of anxiety and lamentation, which is the very nature of material activities. So being concerned about this problem and foreseeing the troubled times ahead, the great sages 5,000 years ago requested Sutta Goswami to explain the Srimad-Bhagavatam after having learned it from Srila Vyasadeva and others. Thus they put forth the following request, which is in regard to understanding the most essential way of acquiring knowledge of the primary path to self-realization, understanding God, and our position in this world. So they asked, O learned one, in this iron age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. There are many varieties of scriptures, and in all of them there are many prescribed duties which can be learned only after many years of study in their various divisions. Therefore, O sage, please select the essence of all these scriptures and explain it for the good of all living beings, that by such instructions their hearts may be fully satisfied. And that's from Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, verses 10 through 11. So in this way, the sages pointed out that in Kali Yuga, this present age, men are easily distracted by so many things, and their lives are very short. So now let us not waste time, but hear only the essence of all spiritual knowledge, so that everyone can be satisfied and know the real goal of life and not remain confused. It was also for this reason that Srila Vyasadeva was feeling dissatisfied, even after compiling all the previous Vedic knowledge into written form in the earlier texts. So the essence of all spiritual and metaphysical understanding and realizations had not yet been put into a concise and conclusive format. So this was very much the need, which we still need today. So Srila Vyasadeva, while questioning his unexpected dissatisfaction, was at that very moment greeted by the great sage Narada Muni, who had just arrived at Vyasadeva's cottage. So Sutta Goswami, in Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapters 5 through 6, relates the story in this way. Narada Muni asked Vyasadeva whether he was satisfied after having written such great texts such as the Mahabharata. Srila Vyasadeva answered that in spite of all he had done, he was still not content, and thus, accepting Narada Muni as a spiritual master, questioned him about the root cause of this dissatisfaction that he felt. Narada Muni replied that the cause was that Vyasadeva had still not written about the sublime characteristics of the Supreme. The philosophy that does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Supreme is considered worthless, but that literature which is full of the transcendental descriptions of the name, form, and pastimes of the unlimited Supreme can bring about a revolution amongst the misdirected civilization of the world. Even though improperly composed, such literature is heard and accepted by saintly and intelligent men. So this is exactly what was missing in the earlier Vedic texts, as well as most other religious scriptures found in the world today. Narada is recommending that to include the topics he mentioned will certainly bring about a revolution to help all those who are living in a misguided civilization. The reason for this is simple. One may defend the science of religion or engage in so many philosophical conversations, but there will never be any final conclusion to such talks without practical experience and realization of the Supreme. Without this genuine experience, all religious or philosophical talk is merely cultivated knowledge or mental speculation. It is another way of passing time for the armchair philosophers, you might say, because anyone, simply by juggling words or taking things out of context, can steer various controversial topics towards any conclusion they want. This is the way some so-called religious leaders or even propagandists use things like religion to justify their own selfish intentions. More light is shed on these points in the Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 22nd chapter, verses 5 through 6, wherein Krishna explains to Uddhava that when philosophers cannot agree on the way they view things, it is simply the interaction of Krishna's illusory energies that motivate their disagreements. But for those who have fixed their minds in Krishna, the absolute truth and ultimate conclusion of all spiritual realizations, the cause for argument and differences of opinion disappear. Just as when you have several hungry people in a room discussing the various causes of, and the means to, extinguish their pains of hunger, no one has to tell them that the process of eating a nice meal has worked when, after having done so, they automatically feel their hunger subside. The experience is universal, and after eating and feeling satisfied, leaves no room for argument. Similarly, after having reached the platform of experiencing the absolute truth, what need could there be for further argument or disagreement? The experience is universal for those who have reached it, and for those who have, participating in a religion or faith which condones the idea of deliberately quarreling or fighting wars with members of other faiths is utterly absurd. Indeed, such fighting only shows the gross ignorance of one's real spiritual identity and the animalistic qualities of such people, though they may claim strong allegiance to a particular religion. Of what use to the world is such a religion or philosophy? As pointed out in the Manu Samhita, chapter 12, verses 95 through 96, such a religion is simply based on darkness and is worthless, producing no good reward after death. So therefore, to help avoid further quarrel and confusion among the people in this age, Narada Muni encouraged Vyasadeva to write and describe the eternal spiritual truths in a more direct manner. So Narada Muni explained to Vyasadeva that spiritual knowledge, though free from material faults and connections, is still incomplete if devoid of an understanding of the transcendental characteristics of God. But Srila Vyasadeva, who is completely perfect, can meditate on the Lord's pastimes for the liberation of all people from material existence. Only one who is retired from activities for material happiness deserves to understand such spiritual knowledge and experience such spiritual bliss. Therefore, Narada emphasized that by Vyasadeva's mercy, those who are attached to material existence should be shown how to attain such spiritual realization. Those who are truly intelligent will endeavor to reach this goal. So Srila Vyasadeva knew all about spiritual knowledge and the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Being because he is a plenary portion of the Lord. Though he is birthless, he appeared in this world for the welfare of all, to explain the characteristics of God in this way. And to teach a lesson, he displayed dissatisfaction when he had still not engaged himself in writing the glories of the Supreme's spiritual qualities, and then accepted Narada as a spiritual master to learn the reason for his discontent. Thus, Narada continued to explain to Srila Vyasadeva that learned men have concluded that the actual purpose for engaging in austerities, sacrifices, studying the Vedas, chanting the hymns, etc., etc., is to advance in the knowledge of the transcendental characteristics of the Supreme, which is the only way to remove all difficulties. This is the ultimate process for perfecting one's life and for attaining full spiritual realization. So this is the essence of all religions, the essence and ultimate purpose of all spiritual paths. This is also the answer to Uddhava's questions about whether a particular process in the Vedic literature is superior or not. Without understanding the absolute truth, one's knowledge of his real identity or the universe, or even the purpose of life, and everything else in one's experience remains incomplete. So the conclusive purpose of the Vedic process is to increase one's knowledge of the Supreme, which will encompass all other forms of knowledge. The most direct way of doing that is through the practice of hearing about the Supreme Being from the Vedic literature, such as Srimad-Bhagavatam. Simply hearing or studying this literature is a part of the process of Bhakti Yoga. As explained in the Bhagavad Gita 11:54, only through Bhakti Yoga can one enter into the mysteries of understanding the Supreme as He is. Similarly, in Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Verse 20, points out that only by Bhagavat Bhakti, or devotion to the Lord, can one get positive scientific knowledge of the Supreme Personality, or Bhagavan. Therefore, Narada requested Vyasadeva to describe the spiritual activities and qualities of the Supreme to satisfy inquisitive and learned men and mitigate the sufferings of the people in general. After all, by engaging in ordinary yoga, people may attain some peace of mind and freedom from desire and lust. But to give satisfaction to the soul requires, and to make a direct link to the soul, requires the performance of devotional service, or bhakti yoga, to the Supreme. This is the means of establishing a link between the soul and the supersoul, or the infinite Lord. This is what Vyasadeva had yet to do. And the perfection of this was to compile the great devotional work of Srimad-Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavad Purana. Then when Sri Krishna had left this planet, after performing his various pastimes by which he attracts the conditioned souls, and on the new moon night near the end of the month of Falguna, which is February and March, the planets aligned themselves in one direction above the earth, with the planet Rahu over India. On that night, in 3102 BC, according to the Vedic scholars, the world slipped into the depths of forgetfulness as Dvapara Yuga ended and the age of Kali Yuga began. It was shortly after this occurrence when the great sage Vyasadeva had heard all these instructions from Narada Muni. So the conclusion of this story, as related in the Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7, verses 2 through 6, is that after Narada Muni had explained all these points, he took leave of Vyasadeva. Then Vyasadeva, in his cottage at Samyaprasa, on the western bank of the river Saraswati, sat down to meditate. He fixed his mind, perfectly engaging it in devotional service, or bhakti yoga, without any tinge of materialism, and thus he saw the absolute personality of Godhead along with his external energy, Maya, which was under full control. But deluded by Maya, the living entities think they are a part of the material world instead of the spiritual world, and thus undergo the reactions of material miseries. However, such miseries, which do not really touch the soul, can be counteracted by engaging in devotional service, or bhakti yoga. But the mass of people do not know this. So to dispel their grief, their materialistic infatuation, and fear, namely fear of death and whatever, the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature, Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is in relation to the Supreme Truth. In this way, Srila Vyasadeva, the compiler of the original Vedic literature, wrote his concluding commentary on all Vedanta in the form of Srimad-Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva very clearly establishes that real Vedanta, or the ultimate end of all knowledge, is to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. As explained in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, verses 28 through 29, in the revealed scriptures, the ultimate object of knowledge is Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. The purpose of performing sacrifice is to please Him. Yoga is for realizing Him, and all fruitive activities are ultimately rewarded by Him only. He is supreme knowledge, and all severe austerities are performed to know Him. Religion, or Dharma in this case, is rendering loving service unto Him. He is the supreme goal of life. Herein it becomes clear that the aim of all austerity, penance, charity, scriptural study, yoga practice, and religious activity is to regain one's love for God, or Krishna. Without that, all religious and pious acts, however positive and pious they may be, remain incomplete. Only through selfless love can God be captured or attracted, or can one bind oneself to Him. From this study of all the Vedic literature and its purpose, it becomes clear that this is the real goal of all yoga and spiritual activities. This is what leads us to the heart of Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, the awakened love for the Supreme Being and all other living beings, which are His parts and parcels. As the Bhagavatam explains, the practice of yoga or karma yoga alone is unable to cut the bondage of attraction to the illusory energy or worldly attachments. Therefore, the easiest way to achieve the most complete form of liberation is through the process of bhakti, or loving attachment to the Supreme Being through devotional service, which can overtake all other forms of attachment, and this is, as explained in the Vedic Shastra, is the secret and ultimate path to the Absolute and understanding our real spiritual connection with that Absolute Truth and the spiritual dimension. So, thank you very much. Good luck with everything, and Jai Shri Krishna.